But anyway, moving on a little bit, this idea of type is also an interesting thing. Type in the Greek means typo, or is called typos, which is where we get the word for type. Isaac was a type of Christ, and there are many books on this subject, but I'll just give you a few examples. Abraham was the father of Isaac. God, the Father, was the father of Jesus. Isaac was the only son of Abraham. Jesus was the only begotten Son of God. I know that's a little interesting there that actually Abraham had two sons, but we see in Genesis 22, it says, "And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of." So he, as the story goes, he is supposed to offer his son as an offering, but is later stopped. And but that whole thing is a picture of what happened as God actually did offer his own son on that same hill 2,000 years later or so. In fact, that whole scene is very interesting. The wood on Isaac's back, the cross on Jesus's back, Isaac the lamb on the altar, Jesus was the lamb on God's cross. And there are many different types of the Holy Spirit and different things in that whole thing. Chuck Missler does a very good job of fleshing that out. And before we move on, the idea of types in the Greek is extremely common, typos rather, in the Greek. It's a few examples of types of Jesus throughout the Bible are Melchizedek, Jonah, Moses, the manna in the wilderness, the two turtle doves, the cleansing with hyssop, Boaz, the temple, Jacob's ladder, the fourth man. There's actually a video on YouTube that goes through every book of the Bible and does it in a really interesting way. It's called The Fourth Man, I believe. Okay, Mike.
Interesting. You know, that reminds me of a book that I heard that was written recently. They called it Third Man Syndrome. And there's, I guess, in extreme wilderness and survival situations, there have been reports of what are called a third man. This is a little bit tangential to the study, but I think our audience might find it interesting. Where, somebody, say, has to carry like 200-pound, packs and a wounded individual 50 miles to the nearest road, and they're doing this in the middle of the night, and they decide to leave one pack, and they're so exhausted, they're trying, and they're all this stuff, and then it sounds like just off in the distance there's somebody following them, throughout the night. So he gets freaked out and tries to continue on and on and on and on. And what ends up happening is they find in the morning footprints and that backpack dragged, to within 100 or so yards of where they are now sitting on the road. I guess there are stories like this all over the place, and the point of the book, quite rightly, was to attribute that to some divine intervention. It's really interesting, actually. You can ask people who have been in car accidents and stuff like that. A lot of people have this idea of an angel. They say, well, it was an angel that pulled me in or out of this stuff, or something grabbed the steering wheel. That's a big digression, but sorry.
No, that's good.
Galatians chapter 4, verse 25. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. Now, this allegory takes an interesting turn now. In the last verse, Paul has tied Hagar to Mount Sinai and has shown that the covenant of Mount Sinai was of slavery. Here he goes even further and mentions that the present Jerusalem is in slavery with her children. Now let's remember that the present-day Jerusalem for Paul contains the temple, where the Levitical system was still practiced. For Paul, the law is still present-day Jerusalem. For Paul, the law is this present-day Jerusalem. The Pharisaical system is the Mount Sinai covenant, and the Pharisees and all those who seem to think that doing well makes them holy. And now they are the slave children here in this allegory. Paul, as you may recall, was a Pharisee. He even calls himself the Pharisee of Pharisees in another letter. Now this is interesting because one of the themes we've mentioned is when you get saved, you change your heart so radically you are reconciled to the Father. But in Paul's case, And in the case of many Orthodox Jews who come to Jesus, your traditions begin to change. You are free to drop the slavery of lighting Shabbat candles, of not doing all sorts of things on the Sabbaths. You're free to not have to ride the weird elevators that stop at every floor. It's an Orthodox elevator. They stop at every floor, going up and down floors. For Aboriginal people, they can drop all the evil stuff and even drop the vendettas that stretch back for generations and generations. But if you still insist on staying in the earthly covenant of making yourself good before God, you then still correspond to the present-day Jerusalem, for as Paul says here, for she is in slavery with her children. Chris?
Yeah, that's interesting. I gotta think about that. Like, the elevators there, they would do that on the Sabbath because they would consider it work to be pushing one of the buttons or whatever.
Yeah, they even have Orthodox elevators or Orthodox wheelchairs, electric wheelchairs that don't close the circuit. So you have to charge it up a day in advance, and the battery runs, which is exactly the opposite of how the normal wheelchair works. So it's like an ultra-Orthodox electric wheelchairs. It's really amazing.
Can you imagine that being like your defense in front of God? Like, well, I didn't.
I had the Orthodox wheelchair, man. I had the Orthodox wheelchair, and I had the Orthodox stove. They have stoves where they say it doesn't. They say lighting a fire is work. So what it does is it has a powerful pilot light that stays on, and so it just sort of like basically one burner on the stove stays on like ultra low. So you're just turning it up and down, and that's not work.
Well, interesting. Fire is mentioned as far as don't make a fire. Pretty
sure. Yeah, no, I mean,
but yeah, I know. Anyway,
trying to make an end run around God's. God says this, and so I can try and find a way around it.
Loopholes. That's what it's all about. Yeah. Okay, so he's comparing Mount Sinai to Hagar. One covenant here, this Mount Sinai covenant, is obviously because Moses received the law in Exodus 19 and 20 there. This covenant, as he says, gives birth to bondage, since it is all about what we must do for God to be accepted by him. It doesn't set us free. It puts us on a perpetual treadmill of having to get the right elevator and having to prove ourselves and earn our way before God. This covenant is associated with Hagar, the surrogate mother who gave birth to Ishmael. It is therefore used wrongly, a covenant according to the flesh. By the way, I'm quoting on this one from the entire thing from David Guzik. He says, the covenant that corresponds to Jerusalem, which is now, that is earthly Jerusalem, because he's going to talk later about heavenly Jerusalem, excuse me, which is the capital of religious Judaism, that is Jerusalem. Since this was the way most Jewish people in Paul's day tried to be right with God by trusting in their ability to please God by keeping the law. Paul emphasizes the point again, the covenant is bondage. Mike?
All right, man. I figured you were going to go on a lot longer there, but I guess not.
Nope.
Okay. Galatians chapter 4, verse 26. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. Now, the Jerusalem above obviously is free. This is the heavenly Jerusalem. When you get into what Paul is saying here and how it coheres with what was written in Isaiah, Revelation, and other places, it's really fascinating. The whole point of the letter to the Galatians and this allegorical model specifically is that trying to get right with God by your own works is only going to end in disaster. But by living under what God has reached down and done, that is, the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we present ourselves as a living sacrifice to the Most High God. That this is the only way we can be reconciled to the Father that's the central message to Christianity. This is reflected in the language of what happens in Revelation 21, where God brings down his city to dwell with man. Revelations 21, 2, 3, 4. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. It's one of the coolest things in the Bible. So we see here that the whole point really is what God is doing. That's where we need to be focused on as believers. Not something that makes us holy, not wearing nice suits or jumping all over brothers who stumble and who've rightly repented. And it's definitely not about spending millions of dollars on the front door of your church. That's actually a huge pet peeve of mine, to be honest. Isaiah said it well in Isaiah 54:17. No weapon that is formed against me shall prosper, or against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment shall thou condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord.